Welcome to Lead on the podcast for nonprofit leaders navigating change with intention. Brought to you by CNA. Social Impact Consulting, we explore what it really takes to lead with clarity, courage, and consistency in complex times. No binders, no buzzwords, just thoughtful conversations and practical guidance to help leaders and missions move forward. LeadOn is powered by Notebook LM and produced by CNA, Social Impact Consulting.
It's great to be here. And honestly, looking at today's topic, we're diving into something that I think causes about 90% of the existential dread in the nonprofit sector.
90% feels high, but after reading this piece, I think you might be underestimating it. Today we're looking at a source titled The Revenue Strategy That Doesn't Flinch by Damon Colaluca. And to kick this off, I just have to describe a scenario he paints that felt, frankly, like a personal attack.
I have a feeling I know which one you're talking about.
It's the funding ideas spreadsheet. You know the one, right? It's on a shared drive. It's got a name like Revenue Brainstorm V4 Final. And when you open it, it's just this graveyard of good intentions. It has 27 tabs.
Oh, I've seen that spreadsheet so many times.
Yeah.
It's usually color-coded, which somehow makes it even sadder.
Exactly. And half the tabs are grants you missed the deadline for, 2 years ago. The other half are these vague earned income concepts that someone threw out at a board retreat.
Right, like launch a merchandise line or something.
Yes, or start a consulting arm. They sound great, but they require a marketing budget and like 3 staff members you absolutely do not have.
It's the classic idea junkyard. And the reason it exists is because nonprofit leaders are constantly being told one specific thing: you need to diversify.
Right. It's the golden rule: diversify or die.
But here's the trap, and this is really the core of our deep dive today. Leaders hear diversify, and what they actually interpret that as is try to do everything at once. They think safety comes from having 50 tiny, disconnected revenue streams. But, as the source points out, that's not diversification, that's fragmentation.
And fragmentation is just a fancy word for burnout. That is a crucial distinction. So the mission for this conversation isn't about, how to raise more money in a panic. It's about moving away from that scramble mode fundraising and building a funding model you can actually run.
A strategy that, as the author says, doesn't flinch.
Which is what we need, because the world is definitely doing a lot of flinching right now.
Oh, sure.
So let's get into the mechanics. The source draws a really sharp line between 2 questions: the tactic question and the model question. And let's be honest, most of us are living in the tactic world, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. The tactic question is that 3 a.m. panic question. It's how do we raise $50,000 by next month to make payroll?
Right.
It's entirely reactive. It's about plugging a hole that just opened up in the boat.
It's who do we know at that foundation, or can we throw together a last-minute gala?
Yes. It's pure survival instinct. But the model question is different. It's asking, what mix of revenue can reliably fuel our mission, given our specific reality? It forces you to look at the engine, not just the gas tank.
Okay, I want to push on that for a second, because I can hear leaders listening right now saying, that sounds lovely, but I don't have time to ponder my model. I have bills to pay. Is focusing on the model a luxury?
That's the paradox. It feels like a luxury. But in this climate, it's actually the only way to survive. The source cites findings from the NFF, the Nonprofit Finance Fund, and they're highlighting rising demand, inflation, massive funding uncertainty.
All the scary stuff.
All of it. And if you keep operating on tactics in a volatile market, you will eventually hit a wall you can't scramble over. A robust model is your best defense. A model beats a scramble.
A model beats a scramble. I like that. So to get serious about our model, we have to start with a diagnosis. The source brings up concentration risk. Now, usually when people talk about risk, the room gets very tense. But the author says we need to do this diagnosis kindly. Why that word? Because
concentration risk usually isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign of how you survived. Maybe you have one huge grant that covers 60% of your budget. You didn't plan for that to happen. It just kept the lights on.
Right.
We're not here to shame that.
Okay.
We just need to see it clearly.
So the financial risks are obvious, the whole all your eggs in one basket thing.
Yeah.
But the deep dive highlights a different kind of risk that I think is even scarier: the human risk.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the one that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. The source calls it out explicitly. What happens if one development staff person holds all the relationships in their head?
The dreaded bus factor. Or, to be nicer, the lottery factor.
Right. If your director of development wins the lottery and moves to Fiji tomorrow, do the donors stay with the organization? Or do they leave with her? That is a massive concentration risk.
That's terrifying because it's so common. The source also mentions government contracts that pay late, which isn't a revenue risk, technically, but a cash flow risk that can absolutely wreck you.
Exactly. So step one isn't to panic. It's just to write these things down. Name the demon before you try to fight it.
Okay, so we've named the demon, we know where we're vulnerable, now we need a plan. And the source introduces this framework called the 3-lane portfolio map. I found this incredibly helpful. It felt like it finally gave me a way to organize that 27-tab spreadsheet.
It's a great visualization tool. It just simplifies everything. Instead of this laundry list of ideas, you sort every single revenue stream into one of 3 lanes: lane A, lane B, or lane C.
Okay, let's break these down. Lane A is the reliable core.
This is your bedrock. This is the money you can count on with, say, 90% confidence. Multi-year grants, stable government contracts, your mature, recurring donor base.
But is there a danger in Lane A? I mean, can you get too comfortable?
You can definitely get complacent. You might assume a grant will renew forever, which is always dangerous. But generally, Lane A is the goal. You want as much of your funding there as possible because it's efficient. It doesn't cost a lot of new energy to keep it going.
Then we have Lane B. Growth bets. This felt like the trickiest one to me. What's the difference between a bet and just like optimism?
Investment, that's the word. A growth bet is a revenue stream that has potential. Maybe you've seen some initial traction, but now you are actively pouring resources into it to make it grow. You're not just hoping it grows, you're watering it.
And the source specifically calls out monthly giving here.
Yes, and this is backed by so much data. Monthly giving programs reward consistency. They don't just explode overnight. So moving it to Lane B means you're making a conscious choice. We're going to dedicate 10 hours of staff time a week to this, or we are buying new software for this. You're betting resources on a future return.
And then finally we have Lane C, experiments.
These are your labs, small tests. Maybe it's that merchandise idea or a new corporate partnership or a little micro-campaign.
The key distinction here seems to be psychological. You have to treat them as experiments, not as guaranteed revenue.
That is so vital. If you put a Lane C project in your budget to pay the rent, you are setting yourself up for disaster. You have to assume it might yield $0.
It's the Silicon Valley approach, right? Fail fast, fail cheap.
Exactly. If a Lane C experiment fails, it's not a catastrophe, it's just data. You say, okay, nobody bought the tote bags, good to know. You close the tab and move on. You don't need 27 tabs. You need a strong core, 1 or 2 smart bets, and a handful of cheap experiments.
That framing really lowers the blood pressure. But this is where the rubber meets the road. We can draw the map, we can label the lanes, but do we actually have the car to drive it? The source spends a lot of time on capacity.
And this is the reality check that most strategic plans just ignore. We love to add things to the map, but we hate asking if the engine can handle the weight. The source even cites guidance from Bridgespan, warning against the copycat problem.
Right, the whole we should do what they're doing syndrome.
Just because the nonprofit down the street launched a successful thrift store doesn't mean you have the supply chain or the retail skills or the accounting systems to actually run one. Context is everything.
So before we move something into Lane B or C, the source has this checklist. Do we have the skills? Do we have the systems? Do we have a champion for it?
And if the answer is no, but we'll figure it out, you probably shouldn't do it yet.
There's one question on that checklist that I think people will actively avoid. It's the stop doing question. What will we stop doing to make room for this?
The stop doing list. It is logically the most important part of any strategy and emotionally the absolute hardest.
It's brutal because in a nonprofit, stopping something feels like you're letting people down, you're cutting a program or telling a donor no. How do you find the courage for that?
You have to shift your perspective.
Oh,
You aren't stopping X because you don't care about it. You're stopping X because if you don't, Y and Z are also going to fail. Diversification without pruning is just overload.
So you end up doing 10 things poorly instead of 3 things well.
And doing things poorly is a great way to lose your Lane A funding.
That connects to another point the source makes about the type of money we chase. The goal isn't just more funders, it's more flexible dollars.
Unrestricted funding. It's the holy grail.
For anyone listening who might be newer to the finance side, can you just clarify why a dollar isn't always just a dollar?
Sure. A restricted dollar is money a donor gives you that you can only use for one specific thing, like buying textbooks for a program. You can't use it to pay the electric bill, or fix the server, or give your staff a cost of living raise.
So you could be rich in restricted funds and still go bankrupt because you can't pay your overhead.
Precisely.
Okay.
And in a volatile world, you need flexibility. If a crisis hits, you can't pivot if all your money is locked up. The NFF survey data highlights this constantly. Sustainability isn't just about the total number. It's about the freedom of that number.
Speaking of volatility, that brings us to the next big theme, uncertainty as strategy. The source is pretty blunt. It says, stop acting like the world is stable. It's not.
And, looking at the data, it never will be again. Giving patterns shift, policy shifts. You see it in the Giving USA reports. Entire sectors can see funding drop just because the political winds changed. A strategy that assumes stability is just a bad strategy.
So how do you build a strategy that doesn't flinch? What are the components?
The source outlines 3 unflinching components. First, a cash runway plan. You need to know explicitly, if all revenue stopped today, how many days can we keep the doors open?
That's a scary number to look at, but ignorance is definitely not bliss there.
No, it's negligence. You have to know. Second, and this is my favorite part of the article, is scenario triggers.
How does that work?
It's about pre-deciding your actions. Instead of panicking when revenue drops 10%, you agree in advance. If revenue's down 10% by Q1, we automatically freeze hiring. If it's down 20%, we cut travel.
It's like a fire drill. You don't figure out the exit route when you smell smoke. You figure it out when everyone's calm.
Exactly. You make the hard decisions when you're rational, so you can execute them when you're emotional. And the third component is protected capacity investments.
Meaning what?
Meaning there are some things you simply cannot cut, even in a crisis. And that's usually donor stewardship. If you fire your fundraising staff to save money during a downturn, you've just guaranteed you won't recover when the economy picks back up.
You have to protect the engine.
You have to.
I really liked the advice here to make it boring. The source says the best strategy is boring in a good way.
I love that. We think strategy needs to be this visionary, exciting, 50-page document, but really it should be a boring, rhythmic execution plan.
Predictable.
Yes. Quarterly targets by lane, clear owners for every single goal, a board meeting structure that is the same every time.
And speaking of the board, the source has specific advice there. Usually, board fundraising is a phrase that makes everyone sweat.
Because we give them vague instructions like, go help us find money,
Yeah.
which is terrifying. The source says give them specific roles. Be a connector. Just make introductions. Be an ambassador. Just tell our story. Don't force them to be solicitors if they aren't built for it.
Boring sounds pretty good when it means calm and effective.
It sounds wonderful.
Okay, let's get practical. The source has this 2026 ready to-do list. If a leader listens to this and wants to start this week, what is the absolute first step?
The first step is the map. Sit down with your finance person or just yourself and a whiteboard and map your current revenue into those 3 lanes. Core, bets, experiments. Be honest. Is your core actually reliable? Is your bet actually growing? Just seeing the picture clearly is 50% of the work.
Okay. Map is drawn. What's next?
Hunt for the risks. Identify your top 2 concentration risks. Is it that one donor who gives 40% of the budget? Is it that one staff member who knows everyone's passwords? Write them down. You don't have to fix them today, but you have to acknowledge them.
And then we choose a lane to work on.
Focus on lane B. Choose one growth bet to sustain for 12 months. Just one.
That restraint is so hard for visionary leaders.
It is, but you have to do it. If you pick monthly giving, focus entirely on that. Build a plan for retention, for messaging, for stewardship. Water that one plant until it's strong. Don't plant a whole garden you can't possibly tend to.
The source also mentions a stewardship cadence. Thank, update, invite.
It sounds so simple, but it has to be systemized. Does every donor get a thank you? Does every donor get an update on their impact before you ask again? If not, fix that system before you do anything else.
And finally, for the board meetings.
Put the revenue strategy dashboard on every single agenda. 10 minutes every time. Keep them focused on the high-level lanes. How is lane B performing? Don't let them get into the weeds of, what color napkins to use for the gala.
That is actionable advice. And for those who want to go deeper, the source mentions some great resources. CNA has the Nonprofit Planning Process Roadmap and a Scenario Planning Worksheet, which sounds essential for that uncertainty piece.
Yes, and the Revenue Reality Toolkit in their resource library. And if you feel like you need an outsider to facilitate this, because sometimes it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle, they mentioned a line D for strategy refreshes.
They also point to a couple of external books, Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game,
which is essential for that long-term orientation. We're in this for the mission, not just the next quarter.
And Eric Rye's The Lean Startup.
That's the Bible for Lane C. It teaches you that experimental discipline, how to fail fast and cheap.
Yeah.
Applying that startup thinking to nonprofit pilots is just a very smart move.
I think my biggest takeaway here is the permission to simplify. You don't have to chase every dollar. You just need a mix that makes sense for you.
That's it. And if I could leave listeners with one final thought, it would be about that stop doing list. We talked about it, but it really is the pivot point. If you don't decide what to stop, diversification just becomes overload. Real strategy requires the courage to say no so that the new revenue you're excited about actually has the space to breathe and mature. You have to prune the tree if you want it to grow.
That is the truth. Pruning is painful, but it's necessary.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap on this episode of LeadOn. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, we invite you to subscribe and share it with a fellow nonprofit leader. You can find us on Spotify and at leadonpodcast.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and lead on.